everybody. So we're back another week here in the shop. Man, it's warm in here. Must be hot this week. So we're back in the shop. Still working on the bomber this week. Remember last week my plan was to basically try to get all the suspension done. That did not work out. I basically got the rear completely finished up. I'm really happy with how it's turning out. And now it's time to move on to the front. I've already got all the trailing arms cut, basically put together here on the fab table. So the front is also running trailing arms. And when you put trailing arms in the front of a chassis, they're actually not called trailing arms, they're called leading arms because they're on the front of the vehicle. Obviously this one I'm starting to mock it up into place. It's basically going to mount obviously onto the axle up here. Shock sits here. It actually sits really good. It's going to basically land right up in here where we wanted it to. And then the uniball is going to be, this is where I'm kind of fighting right now. I'm not 100% how I'm going to mess with this section right here. Ideally what I'd like to do is put basically a gusset in here that also has a bolt going through it to catch that uniball. And I've got to figure out if I can do that. So I think what I'm going to do first to try it out is I'm actually just going to cut a piece of plate and see if I can basically bend it, weld it, and drop it in there, and we'll see what that looks like, and then we'll go from there. But first, I need to actually put the uniball back in the arm. It was out of the arm when it was being welded, so I'm going to hammer in the uniballs, then we'll get to it. Now this isn't the only way this is going to attach. Eventually there's this wrapper that basically goes all the way around this joint, but I didn't want to put any more heat into the uniball quite yet, so I'm just going to mock it up as it is. I'm actually kind of liking this right now. As you can see, I basically have this propped up on one of these little spacers on my fab table, and that puts this spot right in here, which actually lines up with the edge of this tube. I think I just run a plate back here, pick it up, and then throw a bend in the plate and pick up this tube right here, and then I can run another mount off the inside off this tube. I don't know if you can see that tube. Let's see what you can see the tube. So basically I got another tube here. This tube runs all the way to the back. That makes up the engine skid, and that would be where the inside would mount. So basically the inside would mount off of here and come off that engine skid tube, which this is just sitting in here for now. The engine skid tube will actually slide over a little bit. That'd give me a spot right there to mount the engine skid. And then up here it would basically sling up, and I'd mount it a little bit low on the axle just to get the shock in place. That's as high up as that would go. I kind of dig that because once again we're building it full stuff, just like the rear. So basically this would then go up and mount basically underneath the axle like that, which I kind of like. I think that would be good there. So I've built this little bracket here, cut it out of the plasma table, and bent it up on my press. It's basically just some 3/16 plate. Now the one thing that I want to make sure of when I put it in here, I have good gaps along this tube, which is fine. Got a good gap along there. I'm going to plate the bottom of it when it's all said and done. But the most important thing is, am I going to be able to get a bolt in here? And I have to plan ahead for when it's powder coated too. So right there is a little tight. So I'm going to shim the arm up just a little bit. We'll split the difference on that one. There we go. Split the difference on that one. And right there, It looks like I will have enough. Worst case scenario, I could pull the bolt in and out from the other side. Like if I had to, I could make it so the bolt would come out through here, but you can see how close it is to that transmission. So that's gonna be kind of a pain to deal with if I had to do that. Everything on this bomber is super, super tight. That is pretty normal on a tube buggy. If you've ever built a tube buggy before, you know that you just end up putting 10 pounds of crap in a 5-pound bag, and that's just part of it. This one is a little bit more because these leading arms in the front, I didn't make them in a tube, made them out of plate, so a little bit fatter. But I'm happy with how it's going together. So I'm gonna tack that in, then I'll work on the axle end, then I'll start working on the other side. You can see here now these lower links are done. They're the same as the rear. Basically have our fill plates on both sides. That's gonna sit in there. Last thing I need to make is I need to make a cap for the front, and it's just gonna come down to about there and then loop around. I'm not really worried about this Heim getting into a rock. I don't think that's gonna be an issue because the tire basically, you know, this probably sits somewhere right around here type of thing. When I'm building stuff like this, what I do to make sure that both arms are the exact same is I take multiple measurements. I make sure that the Heims are the same distance off the table, which they are. I'll check the angle of the actual trailing arms from side to side with an angle finder, making sure they're the same. You can see I still have some welding to do on these front trailing arms, but now that those are in place, I'll build that cap. And then I'm going to start on this upper link mount, and it'll obviously be in the center here. And I'm going to basically make this link mount into two things. Number one, it's not only going to be the mount for the upper links, which will go through here and here, but it's also going to have a flat plate on the front. And that flat plate on the front will be the mount for my full hydraulic ram, which will basically sit right in here. So I'm gonna do some cardboard CAD and start cutting out some steel. When I'm building the suspension on a tube buggy, it's honestly one of the hardest things to do because unlike a factory vehicle, there's no original basically pickup points to measure from. You're just basically flying blind. Once you've built a few, you know what you're after. And there's some online calculators that you can use to basically come up with some good designs. Now, Randy gave me some ballpark figures that he uses when he puts together these trail chassis. I'm changing them slightly just for my particular setup. But on the front axle, you can see what I've done right now is I basically ran a string line between these two high steer knuckles. I'm using these Spider Tracks heat treated chromoly knuckles with the integrated high steer arm. I absolutely love these. It's like a legit race car part, which makes this super cool. And this string line is basically symbolizing the top of the tie rods, tying the two together. And the one thing I want to check right now is I want to get a baseline caster measurement. So to get a baseline caster measurement on both sides, basically drop the angle finder on the top of the knuckle, and you can see this one's at like 4.2. What I like to run with when I start a car like this, I like to start around 5 degrees of positive caster. Now, positive caster means that that upper knuckle is leaning back. A good way to remember that is to always remember when you're driving in the car, you always want, when you hit the gas, you want to move back in your seat. That's a positive feeling, so that's a good way to remember positive caster. So positive caster is that upper knuckle leaning back. I want to get them both set right around 5, and then I'll throw a little cardboard CAD on the front of that thing, start cutting out some plate. I should also point out that I haven't obviously welded these inner C's in place. That's why those are able to turn either side. You also want to make sure that when you're checking your caster, you want to make sure that the tire's as straightforward as it can be, because as you turn, that caster angle changes. The reason I don't do any of the finish welding on the axle until I'm completely done all my suspension mock-up is in case I have to change something. If I had those C's welded in place right now, and then I ended up having to basically tilt the axle to get a little bit more drive shaft clearance, then I'd have to cut those C's off. I also like to do all my finish welding out from underneath the buggy, so when it comes time to weld that axle, what I will do is, everything's held to place with heavy tacks right now. It's not going to go anywhere. All the link mounts are in place. So what I'll do before I break it off the chassis is I'll basically lock them in with a couple extra tacks just to make sure, and then I'll pull the axle out, put it on my fab table, run an alignment bar through it, make sure everything stays good and straight. If I'm welding on the top of the axle, what I'll do is actually put a little preload on the axle with a jack to make sure the axle doesn't bend. That is a very important thing to do. And when I do that, I'll show you guys that as well. But the goal this week is just suspension, and that's why it's still sitting up on the fab table. It's a lot easier to weld it when the axle's out on the fab table as well, because then you're not crawling around the chassis too. Haven't welded the bearing cups on the back either. Same thing there. Want to make sure the axle's out from underneath the rig, good and straight with a bar in it, and also preloaded if I'm going to do a bunch of welding. So as I get this upper link mount lined up in here, there's a few things you need to watch out for. So this is where the mount is going to go. It indexes off of this cross member. You want to make sure that you're planning ahead for the floor. So the floor of this buggy is going to come across here like this, and there'll be a piece of aluminum that sits here, and I'll probably do maybe a little footwell that kicks up like that. So you want to make sure that you have plenty of clearance for the link on both sides, especially on the driver's side, because that's where your gas pedal is going to go. I do think I may have to rebuild these. I put a curve in them originally. These are basically the kick downs that hold the motor in place. I'm a little nervous that they're a little bit close to that link, but I will rebuild those later after I get the secondary piece that's going to tie into this, go down to the engine skid. What I'll probably do is just trade this out for a piece of straight tube that'll go down from there instead of the angle. And up front, looks like this is going to work out for us. I basically have this piece of cardboard mocked up into place. I'm now going to take this, transfer it over to the plasma table, cut it out, and then I can cut the hole for the Heim. got my front brace in place. The upper link mounts are done on the axle side. They're not done on the chassis side, and that is because I'm gonna wait. I really do think that I'm going to have to move this engine piece right here. I think I have to make it straight instead of curved. I'm a little too close to it right there. So before I go ahead and build out these back tabs, I'm gonna go ahead and finish up that. But that might be something I do when the chassis comes off the table. Not 100% certain right now. It might do that when it comes off the table, because then I can get underneath that engine a little bit easier with the tubes for that engine skid, which will then hold up the engine. I may go ahead and just cut them out. I'm not 100% sure. I haven't decided on that. But what I do want to do to finish out the front end on this is get my hydraulic ram mounted, and that's what this plate right here is for. And that's what the string line is for. The string line is symbolizing basically the tie rods that are going to come out of the knuckles and come across. And so that means that my ram will sit right in here on this plate. This plate is 3/16 right now, and it does have the 2 link tabs done on the inside. I will end up capping the top of these, and I'll actually end up boxing the entire thing in. I'll probably come off of up here and come down at an angle, maybe down like that and then straight down. I haven't decided yet, but this will get a lot more structural. I'll actually probably put a couple backbones in first to hold the ram, and then I'll basically plate it to give it a little bit extra strength. But I'll do that once again when the axle's off of the chassis. That way I'm not trying to work around everything. The main reason I want to get the ram in right now is I want to make sure I don't need to move this tube. I'm not sure if I have to move it or not, and now is a good time to find that out. But aside from that, all the front suspension is all taken care of. Now it's time to move on to the steering. Got my ram in place now, and I've got a couple of issues that I have to deal with. Nothing crazy, it's easy to fix. Number one problem I have is this weld piece right here is getting into the edge of the housing, which is not a big deal. The actual ram itself doesn't need to be centered on the front axle, because the tie rods are actually what makes up the difference, and you can have one tie rod that's shorter than the other. It's just more of an aesthetic thing. But in order to get it close to the center, I still need to slide this end up a little bit. You can see with my string line, I want this string line to be in the middle of that ram right there, which it is not. So I should be able to truck it over, and I may be able to get it really close to centered. This line is the center, but the bolt heads are hitting this winch tube, which is what I was worried about. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to cut the tacks loose on this winch tube, and I may just flip it over and see what it looks like there, or I may have to open up the notches on it and just roll it up. But right now, I just got a couple things to do before I can figure out where that ram is going to sit. I think what I'll do is I'll just cut this tube out, set the ram, and then I'll make the tube fit. All right, that is another day done here in the shop. Thank you so much for hanging out for the week. I got everything done this week that I wanted to, even though I'm a few days behind. So front suspension is all done on the Bomber. Lower trailing arms are in, shocks are in, even got the ram mounted. The next step for this car is to get it off of the table. I need that table for a project that I have to work on next week. But as always, thanks for hanging out with me here in the shop. I hope you enjoy these behind the scenes videos that I'm tossing up here on YouTube. I just think it's a good spot for it. You can always catch Four Wheeler on the Motor Trend On Demand app, and you can catch Big Tire Garage on Digital Lug. And make sure you do all those YouTube things, you know, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you want to see in the comments below, and I'll let you sneak around behind the scenes a little bit more while I'm here in the shop.